evening, everyone. Thanks for coming along this afternoon. Always fun getting together, having some pizza and going through some fun talks. This one's probably a little bit different from Mel.net, but hopefully we don't lose you in our obsession with cloud and Terraform and all that kind of fun stuff. Title's a little bit different to probably what it said on the box, but we're talking about enabling a self-service cloud for software engineers. So what that really means is a lot of the time when you go to doing software work in enterprise environments, you get up with a lot of blockers, a lot of interaction with other teams, dependencies, all those things that kind of get in the way and make life more difficult than you would probably prefer it to be. And in our time as cloud engineers, we've had a lot of people and a lot of customers talk about ways that we can try and make that better, because it benefits the devs and benefits the organization immensely. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So yeah, we'll probably kick off with some quick introductions. So my name's Lachlan. I'm a principal engineer at ASNX. I've been doing Azure and cloud engineering and platform engineering stuff for probably 6 or 7 years now. Prior to that, come from a sysadmin background, all the Microsoft stack, all that kind of stuff. So a lot of my day-to-day is, Azure and Azure DevOps and GitHub and Terraform and Bicep and ARM and all that kind of fun stuff.
Seldom those last two.
Seldom those last two. But yeah, it's a little bit about me. Brendan?
I'm Brendan, principal engineer at Xenix, same as Lockie. Pretty much the same thing. I think I've been doing it a little bit longer, but we won't detail how much longer. Yeah, I mainly focus in cloud native, Terraform, Kubernetes, all the stuff that I find enjoyable.
Hashi ambassador, hence why Terraform's all over this thing. Anyway, we won't hate him for it. All right, so we'll kick off, done a bit of an introduction, and we kind of broke it up. So what's the problem? What are we actually trying to solve? What are the challenges that come up and why we've tried to tackle this thing? We'll go a bit into what the solution looks like and the bits we've chosen and why and how that works and how it makes life a bit easier. And then kick off into a pretty sweet demo that Brendan will run through that will all go perfectly smoothly, I promise.
I made huge changes to it about an hour ago, so it was definitely a wise decision.
Nothing could go wrong. So I've broken the sort of problem stuff down into the developer's perspective and the org's perspective, because they're kind of a little bit different, but there's a lot of crossover. So I think the big thing is just being slow to get started. So new project kicks off, or even in migration cases, whatever it might be, just getting started is so painful and so slow in those enterprise and big orgs. There's so many things in the way that slow you down, change requests and project approvals and getting tech stacks set up and landing zones and repos and all the other stuff that comes with it. Pardon me. All wrapped in process and all the politics that comes with it, and it becomes extremely painful. And the next thing that comes along, even once you get through some of that stuff, is bootstrapping, right? So getting your pipelines, your repos that are often really very similar and pretty consistent, especially when you're using the same cloud and the same org with the same rules and all that kind of stuff. So stuff that can be automated and written as infrastructure as code, so it can be done much quicker, much easier. It's kind of a bit of a painful step. Spending time on admin and organizing rather than building. I don't think I just want to be writing emails and slacking people or teamsing people and saying, hey, where's this request at? I'm waiting for my ticket to get done, and chasing other teams and people in the org to try and get all your stuff set up so you can just get started. Deployment time and time to production. If you get through all those steps, they might be pretty nasty. And then you start using it and it sucks and makes you sad, and you're not really enjoying the work you're doing, which is not fun for anyone, whether you're a developer or the org, because no one wins in that situation. The big question, am I compliant? So am I doing all the right things from the org's perspective? Am I following regs? Am I following org policy? So I'm going to come down later and say, no, it should have been done this way, should have done it that way, all that kind of stuff. I think the last one that's really close to my heart is the frustration with and being limited by the platform. There's nothing worse, I think. You see it all the time, platforms that just make people's lives harder and more complicated rather than easier. So what we've tried to do with this is keep it really simple, and solutions we've implemented to customers in the past, so that it's not just more layers, more of the same stuff. It actually helps accelerate and get things out of the way rather than put more in the way. There's nothing worse than being sold the promise, hey, we're going to build all this tooling and put this platform and stuff together. It's going to make your life really good, really easy. And then you get to use it and it's just more of the same and it sucks. On the org side, I think the first one that usually comes up that we talk to people about is governance and compliance. And there's ways to do that with things like policy and Sentinel and stuff like that, but it's further to the right. So, when you talk about shifting left and having these things come up, sooner, and that feedback loop being nice and quick. Some of this stuff means that in an ideal world, you can delete the feedback loop. You know it's done right the first time. You don't have to worry about it or think about it. It's just all there by default. The same ones we talk about deployment time and time to production. I copy and paste it between both because both care about it, and it's probably one of the biggest problems that come up with these things when they're complex and nasty. Lengthy project startup time. I think that might actually be bigger than compliance and governance when I talk to customers about putting these things together. Is that they say every time we go to start a new project, or someone needs to do even landing zones for migrations or something like that, it just takes ages. And you don't want to be slow and waiting for some of these things. Obviously from an org perspective, trying to be agile and responding to customer needs and business needs, you don't want that time, right? It's just gets in the way, and by the time you go to do something, it's too late and the world's moved on. Or just competitors have beat you to the punch. Wasted developer time. Orgs obviously hate it because it costs them money, and we hate it as devs and engineers because we don't want to be spending our time doing silly things that could be automated or removed completely. So I think that's another big part of the problem from an org perspective. Consistency, I think, is a big one. You don't feel like you're changing jobs every time you move to a different project within the same org, right? Learning new tools and processes and people and the way they work. It's hard. You want to be able to sort of, ideally in an org, and it's a bit of a dream state, but you want to be able to move between things and feel familiar, right? Feel like you're in the same place. I know how to do this. I can get started. It's not starting again from scratch. And flexibility in balance. So that one's a bit of a difficult one because there's a bit of a balance to this. And I'll talk about it a bit. So there's enabling and giving flexibility to developers, but there's also that governance compliance side, and getting that right is really, really hard. Orgs want to feel like they're safe, all the security controls are in place, and ticking all my compliance boxes, everything's okay, but you also don't want to stifle innovation and speed, right? So trying to get that balance right is really tricky. But yeah, it's a pretty big problem that orgs face from their side. So how do we fix it? Infrastructure as code for consistency. So it's all the same. No need to worry about whether it's different or not. Deployment pipelines, so we can automate, do things quickly, and do them repeatedly without having to start from scratch every time. You also get some of the benefits with inner sourcing and all that kind of stuff as well. And obviously cloud for speed and flexibility, and because why would you do this on-prem anyway? Okay, so the bits that we've got now, and these don't necessarily have to be the way you have to do it. You could use, bicep, whatever you wanted to for infrastructure code, doesn't matter. You use your VCS or your, shoot.
So can I?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, shoot.
Can you just define org, because I'm sort of thinking, you mean org like working for a company and then you've got, starting to get progress, so it's like acme.com, you apply for them, or do you mean you're going to an external company and integrating with their CID, doing a new org? So I just want you to frame org better, because I'm.
Yeah, no, that's right. So when we talk about org, we're meaning like an enterprise. And what this will do, and it probably becomes a bit clearer once we get to the demo. Okay. But we're talking about multiple projects within an enterprise.
Within a company.
Yeah, it's all in the same place.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or like different departments in the same organization. Sometimes different departments have different processes. This is about centralizing that in the same way across multiple departments or all of the organization.
Oh, I see.
So it becomes consistent for everyone.
So definitely not like a product that we like. Do you mean like we have consumers and tenants?
Yeah, you go out, you meet a company, and now we're setting up in your org or with you. That's fine.
So and it's a really good point because it definitely wouldn't work. Yeah, because they're obviously also different. That this is just a demo, like this is a solution that we put together to talk to. But every time we've done it somewhere, it's different again. There's always different tools or different rules or different thoughts and opinions, and so it wouldn't work that way really well. Great question, really good point.
Thanks for framing that.
No, it's good. Yeah. No, thanks, man. So for us, we've gone with Terraform. Like I said, Hash Ambassador, and to be honest, using Terraform for a number of years now, it's just kind of my go-to. It works, and I don't have to think too much about it, which is handy.
Is a sensible choice.
We've gone with Terraform Cloud in this one, but you could easily do it with open source. You just have to build some pipelines and some other bits and pieces around it.
Yeah.
We've gone with GitHub version control. Use Azure DevOps or whatever VCS tool you like, and Azure for Cloud, easy to work on GCP or AWS or anything else.
Or all three.
Yeah, or all three, as many as you want at once. Do you want to talk through the solution a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. So we have a generalized concept called a landing zone, which is a way to think about if you're a feature team, you're like, I want to build an API in organization X. You need some things to get you ready to provision infrastructure and then deploy your application. So that is a landing zone. So in an Azure world, that's a resource group that's connected to some pipelines and a service principal for authentication that allows you to provision more resources that are bound to your scope, which is the resource group. So what we produce in this demo landing zone is a GitHub repository with a list of environments and service principals scoped to those environments, set up some branch protection on main, just sensible stuff like that. Azure, we provision a set of resource groups, so one per environment in the set, and a key vault for each of those, and we store the service principals for each environment in the key vault so they can be accessed. Terraform Cloud, every environment is going to have a workspace, so you can deploy anything from within your repository into your cloud instance, and variables that have the scoped service principals in there as well. So everything's basically scoped by environment. So if you've got dev, UAT, test, you can have those three. If you've got more or less or whatever it may be, you can have that many, and that's per feature or per deployment. So a landing zone contains those things scoped to a various number of environments. I think next is demo. Yeah. All right, so this is, I mean, this might go terribly. So if it does, I guess it'll be a good laugh. Okay. So we'll walk through the code for a little bit. So essentially we've got, I tend to call everything Ministry of Magic because I like Harry Potter. So mum in this instance stands for Ministry of Magic, not a mother. So we have a few like subordinate modules in our code. So we've got Azure, which sets up our landing zone. So it sets up, if we get back to this guy. So the Azure module will set up resource groups and service principals and the key vault. We've got a GitHub module that will set up our repository, environments, branch protection, and secrets. And we've got a Terraform Cloud module that sets up those bottom three items as well. And wait, let me resize, that's fine. Okay. So we can run through the code if we want, but I think what we might do is run it in a second. So we've got this guy, which is basically a declaration of, you want it to go bigger. Bigger? Oh, sweet, jeez. What?
Yep. Yeah, one more.
One more? Oh. Okay. My computer has never been this zoomed in, so this is an exciting adventure for all of us. No, you lied to me. Oh, no, because anyways. Okay, so we've got this is like the declaration of our main Terraform module, which calls those other subordinate ones. And this gives us a really clean and consistent interface that we can use to provision those landing zones for n number of feature teams or n number of squads. So we'll just go through that. So global is just like some global stuff. So our Terraform organization ID, our OAuth ID back to VCS, and then the Azure landing zone produces our Azure assets. GitHub produces our GitHub assets, and Terraform Workspace produces the Terraform Cloud assets. And there's some funky logic in there, which I'm happy to talk about offline because it will take a little bit of time. So when we actually want to call this, or we're a feature team and we want to enable ourselves to deploy things, it's kind of easy. They basically need to give us this block of code. And they can have as many users, as many environments, single project at this point. I'm just again trying to do something quite basic, but they basically provide this. And you could supply this in any way. Like we could consume this from YAML, we could consume this from JSON, CSV if you really hate yourself. Like there are plenty of ways that we can consume this data. You could use like ServiceNow or some other service management tool, and we can ingest that data in some way. So in this instance, we're going to produce two landing zones, one for BLT, which is myself, and one for LJW, which is Lockie. This is where we consume those bits of data. So we're going to loop through that map and say, for each of the items in that map, dump in their project environments and users, and let's go and build some stuff. So that was slow. All right. Someone tell me when they can see things.
Enhance.
Sick. Okay, so what we're going to do is, and hopefully this will work, because Azure sometimes does not like me. I set up a makefile because I'm injecting all of my secrets at runtime, because I don't want to have secrets just sitting in Git for obvious reasons, and I'm running this locally. If this was in a more productionized environment, we'd be running this somewhere more logical, like inside Terraform Cloud or inside some sort of CI/CD tool, but demo, so local. So secret injection using 1Password is pretty neat. No, so this is my local machine. So this is iTerm. I'm just running like basically a Terraform apply locally. So Terraform has a bunch of states. So the flow of this is we're going to inject some secrets. Then we're going to initialize our Terraform. So we're going to set up our backend, which is where state is stored. Apparently that's local. Ideally, that would be in some sort of remote backend, i.e. Azure File Storage or in a Terraform Cloud workspace or on some random person's NFS share. After that, we're going to do a plan. So we're going to look at our Terraform code and we're going to say, what would happen if we produce these assets? And it'll go and query the Azure APIs, make sure, see if things exist or don't exist, put it all together, make sure it looks sensible, there are no like conflicts. It'll catch most things. So if you have an overlapping subnet, it'll usually pick that up. Or if you're going to trying to deploy something that already exists, it'll pick that up and it'll say, hey, that already exists, either import it or change the name. And then the next step is an apply, which actually produces those assets wherever they may be. So GCP, Azure, myriad providers, and provider is the mechanism for Terraform to communicate with an API. So it can be literally anything. There's someone made a provider for ordering a Domino's pizza in the US. So you can do this thing. It's not a very sensible way to do it, ordering pizza like that, but because you've got state, so kind of have to manage that pizza order forever, but that's different. And then finally destroy, which is a destructive operation, and it'll just tear down all the resources.
So is that like a virtual machine and running on your Mac at the moment, or is this like custom software that you've got?
So this is just like a literally terminal, so like a PowerShell terminal, and I'm running Terraform, which is a binary, and Terraform is communicating with the Azure API, the GitHub API, and the Terraform Cloud API, and it's producing those assets. So we go back to Keynote, which is here. So it's producing a GitHub repository. It's producing the environments inside GitHub. It's producing the secrets inside the environments. So we'll go and look at that in a moment. Whoopsies. All good. Okay, so tell me how much I need to zoom before say when. Okay, sick. Yeah, I know it's huge one. I can see. All right, so this is an empty subscription, obviously called Ministry of Magic because Harry Potter. This should have some things in there. So we've got some resources which are produced by Terraform. So these are the resource groups, which are containers that hold Azure resources. So as part of our landing zone, we're only going to be producing key vaults inside a resource group. So that's all that's going to be there. But you know, if you're an organization and maybe you need storage accounts as part of your default landing zone for a thing, and like an event hub, like every API or every product is going to use those two things, then you could wrap that up into your definition of a landing zone or your organization's definition of a landing zone. We've got the Ministry of Magic GitHub organization, which will have some repositories. So we've got the two repos. I'm going to mine, and we've got some basic got code owners in here. So we've got a team. It sets up a team. So the permission model is kind of strapped in from a GitHub perspective. It's not for Azure and Terraform Cloud. So we'll talk about like improvements to this in a later slide. And that's one of those improvements is, you know, that RBAC solution. How can we make that more holistic? And that would be, let's integrate the same like nomenclature with Azure and the same with Terraform Cloud. So you might have a group, it'll create the same thing, scope to that landing zone, and add in users into those groups in those relevant platforms. So you have a consistent experience. The same as when you tear down that landing zone, It means you don't have to worry about, oh, did I offboard so-and-so? You know, they're just gone. Produces this default Terraform directory. These are all empty, so there's really nothing fun in there, but it will run automatically for that dev environment. This is where your feature teams can actually write Terraform code. So, and if they don't want to, we would be able to do in a different way, wherein we would supply modules and they would just consume modules for their given use case. All right, so we're pretty much done. So this guy has 122 resources. It's quite a few. Unfortunately, things like environments flesh out that resource count quite a lot. Same as like tags in GitHub. That's pretty much it. Yeah, send it.
Any questions about any of that? We're going back to slides.
All right.
Jump back. Beautiful. We did that. Oh, low. There we go. All right. So I promised we'd talk about how this actually helps people. So self-service, no one likes waiting for, we talked about it at the start, right? One of the problems is waiting for other teams and change requests and all the other stuff that kind of sucks and makes you kind of pull your hair out while you're waiting to get started and stuck into doing some useful and interesting work. So the self-service model, obviously a lot of orgs are chasing it, and it's pretty handy where you can just open a pull request to get what you want, or maybe drop a request into the ITSM tool like Snow or something like that. So there's none of that waiting for other teams or processes or any of that other stuff to get kicked off. You can get started faster because you've got what you need out of the box. So there's no, I've got repos, and we'll talk about some of the improvements and stuff it would make if we had a bit more time and what you've done in the past, but all the kind of boilerplate and all the stuff you need to get rolling and get started is already there. So there's no, okay, now I've got to set my pipelines and repos and get your from cloud set up and get a workspace set up, and I've got all my RGs and tags and is everything right. It's all done, it's good to go. You can focus on writing and deploying code and infrastructure. A consistent experience, so I mentioned before, moving between different departments or parts of an org and having to start again sucks. You want to be able to be familiar with the tools you use once you've spent all the time learning it. And you know, from an org perspective, you want developers to be able to move between things and not go, this is totally alien, right? Also means that from a hiring perspective, easy when things are consistent environments. So you dev, UAT, and prod, like Brennan kind of showed you there, it's just a list and they all come out the same way. So you don't have to worry about, is my UAT the same? Is my dev the same? They're all going to be exactly the same. Can get a little tricky once you start having to, you know, diverge those environments sometimes, but that's what variables are for, and that's a Terraform thing. We won't dump into that too much. Everything gets out of the box, which we already touched on, and everything is code. So it's nice and easy to manage. It's all in a repo. So you can do it easily with a pull request or with an ITSM tool, whatever, you know, makes most sense for the org and whatever's easiest, which is pretty sweet. And how does it help orgs? I think the top one kind of helps developers as well, accelerate time to production. So nothing worse than getting started and it just sits in dev or sits in you know, pre-prod environments, taking a long time to get started and you're just waiting to get through because you know, nothing's kind of satisfying that first kind of run to production. So from an org perspective, obviously they want, like we touched on before, that agility and that speed to respond to things. So always a big fan of that type of stuff and kicking up project timelines. Had a customer in the past where that was like the whole thing they wanted, is it took them weeks, 6 weeks to get something kicked off, to get all this stuff set up with different requests between teams and all that kind of stuff. And it's a very long and complex process. And that came down to like less than an hour. I think the longest part of the process was just someone ticking the box for approval. So it makes a pretty big difference in terms of kicking off new projects or, you know, deploying new landing zones for migrations and stuff like that.
Yeah, reduces that like ideation to production time like drastically.
Yeah. Governance compliance banked in, so you don't have to, like we said, we don't be worrying about, have I done the right things? Is someone going to come slap me on the wrist or make me go back and start again and change things? It's right from the beginning. I don't have to think about or worry about it. I have to wait for something like policy to reject me or something like that, or security to go, no, you can't do that. It's fine from the start. Pardon me.
So all of the inputs that you pass in are validated as well. So you can't pass in stuff that you're not allowed to. Like everything is validated on the way in. So if a user does try and put something in that they're not meant to, it's just not going to work. It'll just come back and say, you can't do it.
Yeah. So it's kind of like that feedback loop, right? If as short as possible or not at all is even better. Less operational overhead. It comes with the consistency, right? So from our perspective as cloud platform engineers, it's much easier when things are the same and you don't need as big a team. It doesn't take as much effort. there's not a whole lot of time just maintaining stuff. You can focus on build and new and innovation and stuff like that, and making improvements rather than just support and deploying new environments and all that kind of stuff. The consistency for environments, developer workflows. So we kind of touched that in the dev side of things, but from an org perspective, they want their people to be happy, right? Talent's obviously pretty painful at the moment. It's really hard, really competitive market. They want people to be enjoying their work and sticking around. And if, you know, working there is painful, people talk, and it becomes pretty obvious pretty quickly when it's not a fun place to work, and these things become a challenge. So take some of that stuff out of the way, makes it easy to educate people, makes it easy to move people between different projects and departments, all of those kinds of really good things. And the last one, which I talked about before, is that right amount of flexibility. So enough room to innovate and do and try new things and build things the way they need to be built for the solution you're trying to develop, problem you're trying to solve, but at the same time, enough control in place that security and all the governance teams and the business side of things aren't, being kept up at night or stressing, worrying if we're doing anything that they're not going to be too pleased with. So yeah, both sides win. Talked about it before, a couple of areas for improvement, and including things before, I guess, but in the demo Brendan did, which probably didn't even see, but we'll be open and honest about it. They're just using local modules, and if you're a Terraform person, you'll know that's probably a little bit naughty.
Definitely wouldn't do that in production.
Yeah, definitely not. Things in their own repos, versioned properly, all that nice stuff will actually be the way to go in prod. Creating multiple repos. So in that demo there, you just get one GitHub repo. As stuff I've had before, maybe I want to separate my infra and app. Maybe I have multiple things for the app that I need to do in separate repos, and I don't want to have to. If you did this every time, you'd end up with different landing zones and it'd get really messy. So being able to just, same as you would environments or something like that, just list out the repos you need to make life nice and easy, and then apply either the same or different controls over the top of them. Extending the R back to Azure and Terraform Cloud. So we did it for GitHub, but we didn't get to it with the Azure or TFC part, particularly the Azure part. That's obviously kind of an important one, but easy to do, right? You've already got the construct of the team. You've already got the users that need access, or the AD group or something like that that needs to be set up. So it's just about applying the right controls at the start. And again, that comes back to that governance and compliance stuff where it's done right the first time. You have to think about, am I using the right roles? Is it set up properly? And from our perspective, we don't have to go and try and chase it up and make it all right or anything like that either. It's just okay from the get-go.
Yeah, it's not a passing or provision really from a group's perspective and accounts.
Yeah. And then adding GitHub Actions pipelines. So obviously the version we've done today, because it's all about the infrastructure side of things a bit more than anything else, we didn't create any GitHub Actions pipelines with it, but adding some stuff to create a default pipeline. Like if you go, hey, I'm using .NET, or I'm using Node, whatever it might be, some default things for that might help, or some default infrastructure as code pipelines, depending on the tools you're using, if you swap them out, or something like that as well, would be a good thing to add.
You can change it so we can bolt on, like maybe you're an organization that uses Azure and GCP. So you can have it so you provision some sort, like some construct of a landing zone in GCP, which might be a project. And then you've got those resource groups, which are the construct in Azure, and you can provision both those things at the same time. If you're a little bit crazy and you want to run some active and you need that thing, but for most purposes, you're probably not going to be in both at the same time for one given asset. But we'd be able to like add that in, and it would not extend the interface too much. It would be more about like enabling features rather than adding like super extensive blocks of code. So we're trying to make that interface that the developers use as slimline as possible and as easy to consume as possible.
We'll get to questions in a minute, but